Hey guys, it's Drew again. Well, I got to flip the script last week. I got to go to a card show, except I was on the other side of the table where I got to pretend to be a dealer. I didn't sell a whole lot of stuff, but I had a great time with an amazing story, and I wanted to share it with you today. So you want to see what I'm talking about? Well, let's check it out. So last week, I got to go to a card show up in North Carolina, and this was put on by Jake, Legends Never Die. As you probably know, he's a youth pastor at a church, and this was for a fundraiser for his youth group. So this was the first card show he had ever put on. He'd been working a lot into it. He had talked to a lot of us, getting good ideas, and I said, you know what, I want to support him. So I didn't really have a whole lot to sell, but I did go up. I paid for a table, and I just got to be hanging out with a good friend and just really enjoying that side. So what did I sell? Well, not much. I actually sold 2 cards totaling $11. So with the booth fee, I was already at a negative. And then, of course, I had to buy something just as an experience. So overall net loss, not very good as far as financially, but what I gained was amazing. And I got a great story I want to share. A lot of times, because Jake was being pulled around as the organizer, he had a table and he was set up right next to me, and I would slide over and kind of help or sell some of his cards and stuff when people weren't looking at mine. But it was all good. And but while we were doing this, this really cool thing happened. An older gentleman came up and he had a book in his hand, and I noticed the book right away in a little box. And I've always thought, what happens if someone comes up and is like, hey, are you buying stuff? And he didn't ask that. But he said, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. So what he did was he started to explain that he was here at this card show, and he was there with his grandsons, and he had never been to a card show before. In fact, he didn't even realize that cards had any sort of value or that collecting cards as adults was even a thing. See, he was probably in his 70s, and he had collected cards as a kid, and he had his childhood collection with him. And at some point in his history, he had put them into binder pages, and but he didn't know anything else. They were just more memories of his childhood. But his grandsons were getting into cards. They were getting into modern stuff and the whole flipping and having fun with modern players. And I know that one point his grandson asked about a Bobby Witt Jr. and his grandfather's like, I don't even know who that is. And so we sort of talked them through and helped, but it was really kind of neat. So what he did was he told us the story, and he told us about how he had this binder of cards, and I was kind of feeling him out, like thinking, are you looking to sell this? And I figured out really right away he wasn't. He was just looking for information, for just advice, for, is this stuff good? Is this good? And what do I do with it? So we just sort of asked him some questions, we being myself and Jake was kind of in and out of this conversation, but it was really, really neat. So as we flipped through the first page right away, boom, all early to mid 60s stuff. I mean, it was all stars. I mean, from Mays and Aaron, Ernie Banks, Clemente. I know all those guys were just on the first page. And as you flip through, I remember seeing 61s and 63s and 66s and a couple of 59s. So that whole era. And I said, are these your cards? He said, yeah. I said, have you had these for a long time? He said, yeah. Did you open these out of packs? He said, yeah. He said, and I pulled out the best players. And later I ended up putting them in this book. But I didn't know that they had any value. And he said, are these cards any good? And I said, these cards are really good. Now, as you can imagine, they weren't, in pristine condition. I mean, they had been used and loved. They weren't completely beat up. There was a couple that had some creases on them, but for the most part, they presented really well. There was a lot of the typical off-center that you would find in packs, but that's what he had because that's what he pulled out of packs dozens and dozens of years ago. It was really kind of a neat experience. And but he was asking about, well, should I get these graded? And I said, well, what do you want to do with this? And he said, I just want to give them to my son someday. And I said, well, let's talk about grading in a second. Let's see what else you have. So he said, I also have this. And he pulled out a box. It was a little box. He said, these were my favorite cards, and this was my favorite player. And wouldn't you know it, he opened it up, and inside that little box was his Mickey Mantle cards. And again, there was a 1960, there was I think a 63. I don't remember the years, but I do remember one specifically. It was a 1959. And the reason I remember it specifically was he told this story. He said back in the 80s, Mickey Mantle was signing at a local show, or not a show, like a store opening. And Mickey Mantle was his hero. He couldn't wait to see. He couldn't believe he was going to get a chance. So he dug up his cards and he found a Mickey Mantle baseball card that he had opened when he was a kid, pulled it from a pack in 1959. And he stood in line, and he had a son who was 4 years old at the time. I think he said it was around 1983. And you know, his son had no idea what was going on, but he went up and he couldn't believe it. There was his hero, Mickey Mantle. And he said he gave him the card, and he said Mantle was just, you know, signing away. And he wasn't talking to anybody. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't really looking up. Someone would pass an item in front of him. He would sign a signature, pass it on down, and so on and so forth. But this gentleman, as he's standing there in front of me, he said, I handed him my card, and he signed this beautiful signature across my card. And I was so overwhelmed. I wanted to react. I wanted to do something. And I just stuck out my hand, and I said, "It's nice to meet you, Mick." And Mickey Mantle looked up at me, and he looked at the line of people, and he said, "All right, guys, I think I need a break." And he stood up, and he shook my hand, and Mickey Mantle spoke to me for about 3 or 4 minutes. Maybe it was just he needed a break. Maybe he needed to stretch his legs. Maybe he needed to look up and stretch his neck a little bit, but he chose me. And the look of in his eyes, I mean, this was 40-something years ago, and he's remembering it like it was yesterday. There's a sparkle in this gentleman's eyes talking about meeting Mickey Mantle, about having him stop what he was doing just to shake his hand, just to chat for a few minutes, to talk to his son. And he said it was the greatest experience, and he said, "I'll never forget that." And so as you can see, here's the card, and he had it right in front of him, and he held it with such awe and such memory. And it was just a beautiful memory that I got to share. I've never met Mickey Mantle. I never saw him play. I never got his autograph. You know, I never saw him at a show. He wasn't my hero, but he was this gentleman's hero. And it was so fun to watch him retell this story about meeting Mickey Mantle. So he asked, what should I do with this? And he said, "Someone told me I should get it graded." And I said, "Well, it depends on what you want to do with it." I said, "Grading does do a few things. It does help protect it, but there are other ways you can protect the card. It does authenticate it." And he said, "Well, but I was there. I know Mickey Mantle signed it." And I said, "Well, then you don't really need that authentication if you're going to keep it. However, if you're going to sell it, then somebody else might." He said, "Well, I wouldn't sell it. I would just give it to my son someday, you know, when I'm gone." And I said, "Well, then you may want to have a conversation with your son and say, what do you want to do with this? And if your son wants to keep it or if he wants to sell it, then you can sort of decide." But honestly, it's beautiful as is. It's a beautiful signature across this great card that he picked out of a pack all those years ago. And it was just such a neat story. And he said, "What about the other ones?" And I said, "Well, you know what?" I said, "Your grandsons." And during this conversation, his grandsons kept coming back up. It's like, "Oh, I found this thing. Can I get this?" And he's looking, and because he doesn't know what things are worth. And Jake actually went off at one point and helped talk him through a purchase, this little kid. And but anyway, I said, why don't you look at these cards? Here's how you can identify the year, because he didn't know a 61 from a 59 to a 63. And I said, here's how you can identify him, and just write down on a piece of paper, this is a 1961 Roberto Clemente, this is a 1963 Willie Stargell, or so on and so forth. And then when you sit down with your grandsons, sit down and tell them the stories. Tell them what you remember about seeing Clemente play. Tell them what you remember about seeing Roger Maris. He had a 1962 Roger Maris. He said he was so thrilled when Maris broke the record in 61. Tell your grandsons these stories of what you remember and show them the cards, because you were their age when you pulled these out of packs, and the memories that you were creating all those years ago, pass those on. So just document those stories for your grandsons and for your son, and just say, this was from 1963, or this was from 1959, or whatever the year was, and just enjoy those times. Don't worry about grading. Don't worry about value. Enjoy the stories. Enjoy the memories. I had a great time. I didn't sell a whole lot, but I did pick something up. And I think I overspent on it, but I don't really care. But this is just another thing as far as nostalgia goes. It wasn't even a card, but I found this really cool little metal lighter, and it's from the 60s, the Atlanta Braves, and it's two-sided on it, and it's just kind of a neat little piece. And while I'm not a massive Braves fan or a lighter collector, I do like kind of cool knick-knacky stuff, and this fits perfectly. But what this will do is this will remind me of a day where I got to see Jake put on a great card show to help raise money for his youth group. It reminds me of a time where I got to sell $11 worth of cards and turning it into a lighter that had to have a little more money on top. But what it really reminds me of is a day where I got to meet a man who didn't know anything about collecting cards as a hobby as an adult, to watch the memories come out of his eyes, to show me this amazing Mickey Mantle autographed baseball card, and to just remember how to relate this time from his childhood to his son to his grandkids. And I just had a great time doing that. So I had a good time. I thought I'd share that story with you today. Thank you as always for coming along with me. Until next time, you guys be good.